Have you ever wondered how Africa became a patchwork of colonies in just a few decades? The scramble for Africa, a pivotal moment in history, is often overlooked, yet its impact still resonates today. Between 1881 and 1914, European powers sliced up the continent, claiming territories and resources for themselves. This frenzied rush for empire building had far-reaching consequences, shaping the modern geopolitical landscape in profound ways. In this documentary, we'll delve into the intricacies of the scramble for Africa, exploring the motivations, key events, and lasting impacts of this tumultuous period. From the Berlin Conference to the rise of independence movements, we'll examine the complex web of factors that led to the partition of Africa and its ongoing legacies. The scramble for Africa is more than just a footnote in history books. It's a critical chapter that continues to influence global politics, economies, and societies today. Late 19th century Europe was a hotbed of imperial ambitions, driven by the need for new markets, resources, and strategic territories. The Industrial Revolution had created an insatiable demand for raw materials, and Africa, with its untapped riches, became the prime target. European powers, fueled by nationalism, militarism, and a sense of superiority, saw colonization as a means to secure their place in the global hierarchy. As European powers expanded their empires, they justified their actions through a mix of economic, political, and social arguments. The concept of the civilizing mission, where European powers claimed to be bringing modernity and enlightenment to backward African societies, was used to mask the brutal reality of exploitation and subjugation. The late 19th century was also marked by significant advances in technology, particularly in transportation and communication. Steamships, railways, and telegraphs enabled European powers to traverse Africa more efficiently, facilitating the colonization process. The discovery of quinine, which could treat malaria, further opened up the African interior to European exploration and exploitation. Africa was not a blank slate, however. It was a complex tapestry of diverse societies, kingdoms, and empires, each with their own rich histories and cultural traditions. The arrival of European colonizers would shatter this equilibrium, forever altering the trajectory of African development. In 1884, Otto von Bismarck, the German Chancellor, invited European powers to the Berlin Conference, a diplomatic gathering that would change the course of history. The conference established the principle of effective occupation, where European powers could claim African territories simply by demonstrating a significant presence on the ground. This sparked a frenzy of explorers, missionaries, and adventurers, all racing to carve out their own slices of African territory. As European powers established their colonial administrations, they imposed their own languages, cultures, and systems of governance on African societies. The Berlin Conference had created a framework for the scramble, but it was the men on the ground, explorers, administrators, and soldiers, who implemented the brutal reality of colonization. British, French, German, Italian, and Portuguese colonizers all played their part in the scramble, each with their own distinct strategies and motivations. From Cecil Rhodes's grandiose visions of a British-controlled Africa to the brutal suppression of African resistance, the early years of colonization were marked by violence, exploitation, and upheaval. One of the most tragic consequences of the scramble was the disruption of African societies and economies. The introduction of forced labor, the destruction of indigenous farming practices, and the exploitation of natural resources reduced many African societies to poverty and dependence. African resistance to colonization was fierce, with many kingdoms and empires putting up spirited fights against European encroachment. From the Zulu kingdom to the Ashanti Empire, African leaders mobilized their armies and engaged in protracted battles against European colonizers. International tensions between European powers were also a hallmark of the scramble. Border disputes, rival claims, and competing interests created an atmosphere of mistrust and hostility, often teetering on the brink of war. The scramble for Africa was not just a struggle between European powers and African societies, it was also a moral crisis. Many Europeans, including missionaries, humanitarians, and abolitionists, spoke out against the brutal excesses of colonization, highlighting the contradictions between European values and the brutal reality of empire building. As the 20th century dawned, the scramble for Africa began to wind down, and the era of decolonization slowly took shape. African nationalist movements, fueled by the desire for independence and self-determination, began to challenge European rule. In 1960, 17 African countries gained independence, marking a significant milestone in the struggle for African liberation. The next few decades saw a wave of independence movements sweep across the continent as African nations reclaimed their sovereignty and began to forge their own paths. Today, the legacy of the scramble for Africa continues to shape the modern world. From ongoing debates about colonial reparations to the lingering vestiges of colonialism in contemporary Africa, the impact of the scramble remains profound. The scramble for Africa serves as a poignant reminder that the decisions we make today will have far-reaching consequences for generations to come. As we reflect on this tumultuous period in history, we're reminded of the enduring power of human agency, the importance of empathy, and the need for us to learn from the past. What are your thoughts on the scramble for Africa? Have you learned something new today? If you're interested in exploring more African history or colonialism, be sure to check out our other videos.